Hey, good afternoon. It is Thursday, November 7th. I am Rob. Around here, I'm that developer dad, and I'm building apps with .NET. So far this week, I've been working on migrating out of my Azure SQL database over to Azure Table Storage. A, it's cheaper. B, it's always on. And C, I don't really need the relational database capabilities offered by SQL Server. And as far as performance is concerned, from like just pure eyes on screen use of the application under Azure Table Storage, it feels just as quick as SQL. So I feel pretty good about the decision to migrate off of a more formalized relational data store over to the Azure Table Service. It does require a little bit different way of storing the objects. It lets me store them actually as serialized objects more so than shredded out rows and columns of fields. It makes things a little bit more interesting in terms of serialization and deserialization of complex data, stuff like that. But I think on balance, we're about even for as far as the responsiveness of the application. So this morning I started creating a customer builder class. It is right here. I'm calling it the user account builder in this case. And what it's doing is it's first querying the user's information out of Entra via Microsoft Graph right here. And then we're populating the parts of the user account that we can from that information. And then we go try to pull a subscription resource out of the resource access component, which is currently using SQL Server, but eventually we're going to move that over to table storage and just basically setting up a local representation of what that looks like. And then it returns it to the caller. Now my caller here is just a console app, and what we're doing here is I'm really just building out a sort of a migration path from SQL to table storage here. And so first it goes and it gets all of the users that are listed in a specific group. And all users of the DMs familiar will be members of at least this group. And this is like the known users group. Excuse me. It then goes and pulls any subscription information that exists, or rather it builds the user account object, I should say. By using that customer builder, it does all the queries and transformations and all that stuff from storage idiom to local manager idiom. And this, if user account is not null, it does a thing. But what I'm going to do is finally, I'm not going to monkey with that. I am going to, well, first I need a table provider, var user table equals get table get sub access table provider from the config, or using the config, I should say, and I need to create that method. So here's the get sub access. I need a static I user subscription access, but this time I need the get, and of course I've got a memory like a sieve, Copy that. V I configuration config and I user subscription access SVC equals null. Return SVC. Boop. So, what's my construction pattern for those guys? This is the table access. User subscription table provider. None of this stuff is implemented yet, but that's okay. Now is my quota access table provider. It's also internal. So I'm going to need some builders for this. So let's add a new class. And I'm going to call it the Dependency Builder. All right. And we're going to make this guy public. And build user subscription access, public, static, quota access, build quota access, configuration. Gotta give that a capital C. Config. Satisfy the dependency. Just use the local version. There's that. And I'm going to need to add this here. Copy. Paste. And in this case, we're just gonna hard code some crap here. But when I get ready to migrate the actual application over, I'm gonna need to redo this a little bit. Excuse me. So let's go with var config section equals config.get required section, and I believe I've called it ATS, Azure Table Storage. Var cn equals config section connection string var svc equals new user subscription table provider, pass in the connection string, and that's going to grump at me, but that's okay, I'll fix it in a second. Return svc. Cool. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing up here. Just instead of the user table subscription provider, we're going to return the quota access table provider. Save. Now we've got some compiler errors. I'm not surprised. Go to definition, connection string, iLogger, so I have to pass null on that because I'm not passing a logger in. Let's not bother with a logger. And go to the definition on this guy. There isn't a constructor here, so private read-only string connection string private read-only table service client storage client and CTOR and I need a connection string equals CN. No. Get out of here, IntelliSense. String CN. I logger of type user subscription table provider nullable logger private read only I logger equals logger and storage client equals new table service client connection string. And that's about all we got to do there. Let's make sure our dependency builder is still null. There we go. So at least we're getting back an instance of that subscription table provider. And that's not really going to do a whole lot for us yet because, well, none of this stuff is implemented. So user subscription, blah, blah, blah. And because what I need to do here is actually deal with the whole user. What I need to accomplish here is first come up to iUser subscription access and just temporarily task of user resource save user account. And it's going to take in a user resource user. Now I'm going to have a couple of subscription access components start to complain here. I'm going to come down to the SQL provider, go all the way up to the top, and I'm just going to say, go ahead and implement the interface, and we're going to throw an exception. We're going to go ahead and throw that not implemented. And on the table provider, however, let's go ahead and implement that properly here. So public async task user resource and save user account user resource user account. Now, one more change I got to make to that interface. Save that. Come over to the dependency builder. That's good. And what's this complaining about? Non-null value. Oh yeah, that's right. I gotta make this a nullable logger. Okay. So save user account, whatever, user resource, user equals null. I gotta make this nullable. Hey Scott, how you doing, man? Turn user. So that'll shut that up. Now we gotta try catch exception EX. I'm doing okay. And I'm going to GUID error ID equals GUID.new GUID, and just for now .log error. I frequently find myself stuck at something. Is there something in particular you're stuck on? Because when I get stuck on something, if I get really, really stuck, I get up away from my desk and just go do something else. Oh, well, it really depends on what I'm doing. If it's just implementing CRUD code or patterns or what have you that I've done in the past that I could do in my sleep, not very often, if I'm being real. But when I'm trying to get into something new or a new technology or a new concept, I'll get stuck all the damn time. And as frustrating as it gets, the dopamine hit when I finally figure it out is just aha. You get that, oh my God, I'm an idiot, I'm a fool, I'm a nincompoop, I have no business doing this, I should sell my computer. And then you finally figure it out and you're back to, I am a god once again. That's just, I love that feeling. So I need a table client. Client equals storage client dot get table client of, well, I've got some storage models in here. User entity. And so I need to say user entity dot base table name. Cool. Next thing I gotta do is say user entity equals, and I'm gonna change the name user resource from user to resource. I like that. So we're dealing with entities and resources. That feels like a nice standardized way of naming my method local thingies. Await client dot get entity of type user entity. And this is not an entity, it is a var. Table query. Get entity async. And now I need to pass the partition key. And we're starting to get close to the edge of my horizontal real estate here. So I'm going to say user entity dot table partition ID, and the inbound, oh, go away, user account, user account dot user ID is my row key. So save that. And user entity of the nullable variety equals table query dot value. If entity is not equal to null, we're going to do all of this stuff. First thing, if the entity is not equal to null, no, wait. If the entity equals null, entity will equal user account dot to user entity. Else, entity equals entity dot apply user changes, user account, and then finally, if entity is not equal to null, client dot, we need to await upsert entity async of user entity, entity, and I don't need the type discriminator there because it can be inferred from usage. Var response equals if response dot status is greater than or equal to 400 var message equals response dot reason phrase throw new exception string the storage operation failed message. Yeah, good enough. And then finally, if response dot status dot in range, nope, between, nope, is less than 300 and response.status is greater than or equal to 200, which means it's okay. And I should reverse those. Yeah. Control X, less than 300. Paste. There we go. Resource equals entity dot to user DTO. Boop. And down we go out through all the goodies. And that should be enough to make this go. I'm not going to implement this other stuff just yet. And the user subscription SQL provider. I could save this, build, rebuild. I'm just going to do a screen test against the compiler, excuse me, to make sure there's nothing obvious or dumb that I've forgotten. And then we're going to have to step through all of this code to make absolutely sure it is doing what I need it to do. Okay, no errors. I've got a shit ton of warnings, pardon my language. And it's all in this new stuff. I'm gonna have to clean these compiler warnings up before I can, before I'd feel good about issuing my pull request. But cleaning up compiler warnings is an exercise for offline. Okay, so there's my SQL provider. It can go away. I don't need it right now. User subscription table provider. I'm going to need to keep this open because I want that breakpoint. All this stuff, I'm going to need to translate that subscription back into a resource. So I am going to have to do that. My dependency builder is good enough for now. I'm going to need to change that when I go to integrate that access component into the mainline applications. Excuse me. User subscription access. That to do. Pull this into a different access component. Maybe. Because right here I've got like start subscription, load subscription, renew and cancel, and those are activities that are performed against a subscription object, and they're not really resource access methods. Save, on the other hand, is absolutely a resource access method. So let's come back to my program and get sub-access table provider. I need to MS graph, metered usage access, and I need to say using and ATS users equals game tools dot metered usage access dot Azure Tables provider. There we go. Come down here to my dependency builder or my service creator and say SVC equals ATS users dot dependency builder dot build user subscription access, pass in the config. Get rid of this null. And that should be good enough. We are going to need to step there. Step here, I should say. And in fact, I am going to not put the breakpoint there. I'm going to put the breakpoint here. All right, so let's save all that stuff. Come back out to Program.cs. And here's build user account. And var user resource equals it's going to be user resource you got to use the models equals user account dot to user resource. And we've got down here model extensions, user subscription to sub DTO. I'm going to need a public static user resource to user resource this user account DTO. Now, this is going to get hairy. This is going to get real hairy. User resource equals new user resource and return it. DTO. Nope. Resource dot user ID. I do have GitHub Copilot. The Copilot experience in Visual Studio itself is not fantastic. Dot you have a different opinion. The only thing I've really gotten a lot of use out of in terms of Copilot itself inside Visual Studio is the chat. In Visual Studio Code, it's wonderful. But you know what? You're absolutely right. Open chat window, learn more, settings. Let's take a look at the settings. GitHub Copilot, AI exception, assistant, Git preview, GitHub resource remote, agents, implicit document context in chat pane. Yeah, let's do that. Referencing your hashtag solution. Suggestions of the performance profiler. I'm not concerned with that yet. Here's that. Okay. And resource dot current subscription. I know that I added a subscription status. Is that Now, resource dot current subscription equals DTO dot subscription dot to resource model. And I need to add a new extension method. Public static user subscription to resource model. This subscription DTO. And I believe that's about it. Now, I want to look at my types. So I've got that stuff, current status. I need to set that. And has user subscription got that current status? It doesn't. And I really ought to set that. ID is just going to go away eventually. Public string, current status, save. There we go. I believe that takes care of the subscription. DTO.subscription. Make that nullable. Excuse me. Make this nullable, and we're going to bounce early. If DTO is null, return null. Get rid of the blank line. User account does not contain a definition to user resource. Oh, bullshit, it doesn't. Pardon my language. There we go. To user resource, good. Now, is there anything I'm forgetting in the mappers? Oh, yeah. For each user vendor ID in DTO dot external IDs ID DTO ID resource equals ID DTO dot to resource. Model. And I got to set up another public static. And we're going to bounce out to the end of the line. Public static Oh gosh. User ID resource. To resource model. This user vendor ID. DTO. And it didn't quite get it. It almost got it. I have a feeling that those are not marked as public. I have a feeling that those are not marked as public properties. User ID of vendor. DTO dot vendor name. And I got to pop out here. Oh yeah. Public. Save. And resource dot what? User ID of vendor. Vendor name. Okay. So I've mapped it. And if ID resource is not equal to no, resource dot external IDs, and it's not called that, dot IDs dot add ID resource. And that's about all I got to do. And I'm not handling subscription activities yet, so we ought to be okay. Save. Back to here. And var save user account, user resource. If saved user is not equal to null, console dot write line user resource dot, we're interpolating this, Rob, display name, saved successfully. Yeah. Save. And I think we're ready to step through this nonsense. So we've got our build user account. We know everything down to about here is functioning correctly. Just for sake of sanity, comment that stuff out, get rid of that breakpoint, save it, run it. We're probably going to get hung up on a breakpoint in the dependency builder, but that's okay. And we got a, oh yeah, I think I commented out one too many. Oh, this is in model extensions. Where am I at? What did I screw up? This. All right. so I'm going to get my required config section. I'm going to get my connection string. Step up into here. I've got a service. Good. And it is configured. Build user subscription access. All right. And it's thinking and chunking and doing its things. Or I just goof something up at some point. Yeah, I feel like I screwed something up somewhere. Or it's just gotten into some bizarre state. So let's come out to Dependency Builder. We know that's building what it needs to. Close that. This is up in the resource models namespace. I'm okay with that. Model extensions I'm going to want to step through. So we're going to leave that open. Don't need the interface. User subscription table provider, we're going to need that. So let's just play and see what we get. Now, hopefully the graph provider isn't being dumb. And it feels like it is for some reason. Now this is working this morning, and I don't think I've goofed around either in Azure or inside the table provider at all. But I guess we'd better step into that, hadn't we? So let's go. We'll pause here, step in, do this. We got our token. Do things. Return my users. Okay, so it seems to be okay. So I should be able to just run. And there we go. So we're retrieving all the things. We're converting the things. Or rather, we're building the things. And now it's time let's test my extension method, like my mapping stuff. So get rid of that and go here. Oops, not what I wanted to do. I wanted to step in, but do I have all the things? Subscription status is inactive, which is accurate. Current status inactive. My quotas for NPC AI detail is 0 and 0. My storage is 1 and 100, and okay. So good. And let's just pop in here. What's the display name on this one? This one should have zeros. Shouldn't even have a subscription. That should come out as null. Good. And I should get a vendor ID. And we'll build, do the thing. Excuse me. This should be inactive. Yep. Good. We'll step in here. Storage consumption should be non-zero. AI consumption should be non-zero. Good, good, good. We're stepping over all this stuff. Return the resource. And the user resource is not null. We've got all the metadata, all that stuff. Good, good, good. Continue. Let's uncomment this stuff. And we'll test the save. And we'll go to the implementation. Right here, good, we've already got a breakpoint. And LFG. So the user account that we're going to save is for devdad. And we'll get our table client, see if we have an entity. Table specified does not exist. Okay, so that's something that I have over in my quota table provider, just as sort of like a let's make sure stuff exists. I've got a little helper method. Where are you? Load user quota, save user, build table client. This is what I want. Copy that. Here's my table provider. I'm just going to run down here to the bottom. Paste that there. And here, instead of going directly against the storage client, I am going to build table client. Let's try it again. And that build table client method, it calls out to the storage, the table storage client, and if the table doesn't already exist, it will create it for me. Let's go ahead and do that. Specified resource does not exist. Okay. And we got a 404 not found. User entity. Table.partition ID. Is users. My client is going against this. And for some reason, it didn't return a value. It gave me a 404. So let's hit stop. And it was my understanding that I would get an Azure response but it throws a request failed exception. Let's run this again. I want to make sure that's a request failed exception before I do a try catch around that. So we're going to move that to here. And it is a request failed exception. So this needs, oof. Try catch request failed exception EX404. Move this up in here. Move this there. Entity equals table query.value. This is expected if the entity doesn't exist. If EX404 dot I really want it as a int dummy equals 1. I do want to take a look at what's going on inside that request failed exception just to get a better understanding and see if there's something interesting I can do with that information. Or if I just need to let it go ahead with entity being null and fall through into this stuff. Now, something else I want to do while I'm just kind of farting around. I want to come in here, go back to the Azure portal, GM Tools app data, and let's take a look at my tables. And here's business objects. There's nothing in here, and that's fine. That's okay. I don't expect there to be anything there yet. I haven't created anything. So let's take a look at what we've got here with EX404. Specified resource does not exist. Yeah. 404 not found. Error code resource not found. I don't have an inner exception. It's just a resource not found. So that's fine. That's okay. I can get rid of that dummy. So if entity is null, first thing we're going to do is assign it from the incoming user account. And this should now be fully populated. System not implemented exception, system not implemented exception. Okay, so there's some goofy shit going on there. I'll fix that in a minute. The row key is a new GUID. I really thought I had gotten rid of those things, but that's okay. Partition key dummy, row key dummy. My partition key is users. All right. Stop here. I do want to go into that user entity class and fix up the not implemented that are getting thrown down here, because I really ought to have done that the other day when I was setting these up. Get set. And I'll run over here. Get set. S. All right. And I've got current subscription JSON. And I feel like quote access table provider. I did add a marker property to that, right? The subscription status, I did. And public string subscription status get set. I feel like I want to add a date time for the renewal date, but I'm not going to monkey with that. Save that. This is really just to help querying later. So user entity, and I do need to update my user entity and apply user changes. So in here, entity dot subscription status DTO dot subscription status. And then I've got an apply for an existing. Entity dot, no, not apply user changes. You goon. Subscription status equals DTO dot subscription status. Good. Save. Let's try running it again. And it ought to break for me just inside the table provider. I don't mean break as in broken, I mean break as in hit the break point, of course. All right, so we got that int dummy equals 1. I gotta remember to rip that out at some point, but that's fine. Entity equals null, user account dot to user entity. We have transformed it. Let's make sure the stuff is okay. Timestamp is null. E tag is empty. Subscription status is inactive. Good. So entity is not null. We should be able to upsert the entity. Spot status is 204. We can convert our entity back to a user DTO. And we've got all the goodies. Oh, I gotta redo that extension method. But that's fine. So let's continue. I'm going to get rid of this breakpoint and just let her rip. Take a look at the output of my console. Dev.dad save successfully, refresh. And if I look at the resource in Azure Storage, or in the Azure portal, I've got all this good stuff. Now, there's one last thing that I forgot when I was reworking the extension methods there. And let's just do this. This is expected if the entity doesn't exist. Eat, error, and continue. Yeah, that's fine. Boop. And in my usage data transformers, I need to come into user entity.toUser entity. And subscription status equals DT. Oh, yeah. I need to go to user DTO and say DTO dot subscription status equals entity dot subscription status. Save that, and that should be fine. Got rid of my dummy equals 1. Good. Excuse me. And yeah, we are migrated. So there's one last thing. Well, there's a bunch of last things that we got to do here. There's, a couple more things that we got to do to actually start using the table storage elements instead of the SQL elements in the main application. So I'm going to take maybe a 2-minute break, and we're going to start working on that stuff as soon as I'm back. So give me a minute. I'll be back, and we'll finish integrating table storage throughout the actual product app, and then we'll test that change. Just be a minute or two. Okay, so we know all that stuff is working. Our objects are over there. And now we can start getting ready to integrate table storage into the DM's familiar. Excuse me. Now, instead of just barfing out these things, I want to add public static, and I'm going to need to use a dependency builder from one of the other components as a comparison. So vertical document group here. And I want to go all the way over here. Oh, no, I don't. Public static iService collection. iService collection. We'll use that. And what did I call these things? Derpy derp derp derp. Come on, Rob. And these are just extension methods. Use, okay. So use quota access table provider. This, come on. This, iService collection. Come on, Rob. Here we go. I want to peek over here. Services. Configuration. And let's see how we are working that syntactically. And my mouse is out of charge again because it's doing silly things. Let's expand this. And so I got to get the connection string, and I throw errors, and I add a scope using all the stuff. Okay. So, first thing, var how am I doing it over here? required connection string. Private const string required cn string equals, I believe I've called it user data. Cn equals configuration dot get connection string required connection string. If cn equals null, we can't start the app because we can't connect to the data. And then I say services dot add scoped. I quota access and then pass in the factory method. Access service provider. There's that. And I say I logger factory nullable lf equals sp dot. Now, am I trying to get that as a required service? I am. Get required service of I logger factory boop I logger of quota access table provider logger. I actually don't need that type discriminator here because it all satisfies an iLogger equals lf dot create logger of let's just do this way. Quota access table provider lf dot create logger. What are you complaining about? Okay, I have to use the type discriminator on both sides. Quota access table provider. Okay, that's good. And we instantiate it. Good. Return SVC. And then finally, we return our services. Okay, so there goes quota access. Dependency builder, what are you complaining about? Oh, now I need to make it static. Excuse me. So there's that. You know, instead of doing all this crap, oh no, I would need to obtain the logger correctly. Never mind. But public static service collection use subscription access table provider. This service collection configuration config var cn equals configuration get connection string. If connection string is null, throw up. Oh, dummy. Services. We'll return the services collection. And we say services dot add scoped user subscription access. There's all the stuff. We can return it. Great. So there's my dependency builder. Close that guy. Let's pin the Solution Explorer back. I should be able to close up resource access. Table storage test. Now we are going to use, first off, set this back as our startup project. And come into Program.cs. npc access.sql server. We're not using that anymore. See ya. Go to dependencies. Make sure I've got project references to all the things I need. And I did not, but I do now. Say OK. Okay, that's just a deleted line. And using tools dot metered usage access dot Azure Tables provider. Cool. Now create startup logger, setup configuration, create services. Go to definition. For some reason, Apple Notes is continually bouncing into focus. So I'm just going to quit out of it for now. All right, so I've added my HTTP client, my context accessor, all of that stuff. That's necessary. MS graph config, rule set access, card deck, dice bag, and instead of the SQL provider, table provider, table provider, and I didn't call that by that name in my dependency builder. Use subscription access table provider. Save that. All right. Could not attach the resource providers. And resource providers added. Okay. Usage meters, townsfolk manager, AI subsystem, semantic kernel provider. All right. Cool. Save. Build clean. And here I was worried that this resource access thing was going to take me a whole lot longer than it has. And in total, between, I think it was last Friday that I started on it, and right now where I'm about to just test the changes and make sure everything's okay, I'm sure I'm going to have to adjust some component to component calls and stuff like that. But I expect those changes to be fairly minimal. But yeah, it's been, because I've only worked on it a couple hours a day, like primarily during stream, and I've put like maybe a couple extra hours into it on top of that. We're looking at about 3 working days to create and reintegrate the new implementation of those resource access components. So bravery test. Let's close that. I don't need it. You can go away. You can go away as well. There's my test explorer. Let's go ahead and commit these changes. Adds Azure Table Storage implementation for quota and user subscription access. Reintegrates, replaces the SQL providers with Azure Table providers for those resources. Commit. And we are not yet ready to push and do the pull request because we got to test the bejeebers out of this. And I'm probably going to call it a stream once I see that it's either going to explode all over my face or that it's going to work. I don't expect it to work the first time. I'll be very pleasantly surprised if it does. So here comes that, and we have explode. Table service client connection string parsing error. And it's still trying to go against the connection string because I probably goofed something up. So that's okay. I'm going to call it a stream. I'm going to debug this stuff and get this particular task over and done with. And then tomorrow we're going to take on a couple more of the sort of to-dos that I have. And then, well, I'm going to get, after I've got this working, I'm going to deploy it up to Azure. Tomorrow, we're going to start working on a couple more of the to-dos I have for the soft launch. And then we're almost to go time, friends. Once all of these little to-do things are done, we're going to pivot back to the admin component, but I do want to try and launch maybe before I do a whole lot of work on that admin component, so that I've got a better feel for the actual manual activities in the process that'll run from the time I get paid by somebody and they are able to access the software. And there's a reason I'm going to do this as a private soft launch, because I'm going to have to do all of that stuff manually. And it also means that the clock's ticking, because I'm not going to want to have to deal with doing renewals manually every month or anything like that. I'm going to have at most 30 days to get this admin system stood up, tested, and integrated. Not necessarily in that order. But yeah, I think we're in a really decent place. Yeah. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for joining me. I will see you all tomorrow. Take care of yourselves, and happy coding. Later on, gang.